Hey everybody out there in YouTube land, we've got a good friend of mine in here with one of the most iconic pieces of rock memorabilia ever. I mean, this guitar is something else. This is Dweezil Zappa, a fabulous guitar player, son of Frank Zappa, and this is a guitar that Jimi Hendrix gave to Frank in the late 60s at the Miami Pop Festival, which I was actually at, by the way.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. In fact, Hendrix landed, 2 helicopters landed at the end of the festival. I don't know if you noticed this or know about this. And back in the day, all these bands would come in and they'd have to tune up for 10 minutes and all that. 2 helicopters landed and everybody was going, who is it? The Beatles? You know, who's landing in the helicopters? And it was Hendrix in one and his band in the other. And they all had their guitar cords. The guitars were tuned. They walked up, plugged in, turned around, and hit the first chord, and the place lost it. And Hendrix was really playing great at that moment. I mean, he was really on his game, and it was a biblical experience.
I can imagine.
And so maybe you could talk a little bit about this.
Sure. This particular guitar, as Norm was talking about, was given to my dad actually at that show by Jimmy's roadie. But Jimmy and my dad were friends, and they would play together when they had the opportunity. And when he had the guitar, it obviously didn't look like this. It was all burnt, this part, the neck, and the other things were destroyed. But Frank, my dad, had it on the wall in his studio just as a decoration for a while, but then he decided he wanted to put it back together. And in the mid-'70s, he put it back together, and this was the first way that it was put back together. This is what it looked like, and he was on the cover of Guitar Player magazine in 1977, and this is what it looked like. It had the mirror pickguard, it had these special electronics. You know, this is a blend knob for what was, at the time, likely to be the first version of a piezo pickup, because he had a Barkasberry contact pickup mounted in the neck, and so he was using it for this direct sound, which had a blend knob here. This had some EQ features, so like a sweepable EQ and then a Q for the frequency range. You know, the guitar itself was played on a lot of things in the 70s. And Frank played it on stage. Adrian Belew played it on stage when he was in Frank's band. Steve Vai played it on stage when he was in Frank's band in the early 80s. But the guitar has changed its appearance since the time that you first saw it on the cover of Guitar Player in '77. As Frank continued to tour, it had a different pickguard, a black pickguard, and then a maple neck. And he had different electronics. But at one point in the early 80s, it disappeared. We didn't know where the guitar was. So I found it underneath a staircase at our house that's near the studio, and it was in pieces, and all the electronics were gone. The neck was off, and the neck that he had been using on it at that time got damaged. And so I told my dad that I found it. Did he want me to put it back together? And he said, sure, put it back together. And I took it to Fender. And Jay Black, who was a master builder at Fender at the time, helped put it back together, and we had a maple neck with a flipped headstock, so it was a nod to Jimmy. And then it had a tortoiseshell style pickguard, and then it was more just stock electronics like it would have been in the 60s.
Right.
And then after putting it back together that way, you know, my dad played it. He enjoyed playing it, but he ended up giving it to me. He said, you know, it was, would you like to have this? And of course,
yes,
you know,
I would think so. Yeah,
yeah,
nice legacy.
Yeah, and so over time, I thought, you know, because it's so iconic from that picture from the cover of 1977. I wanted to recreate what that was, but I didn't have the neck because I had never actually seen this neck on that guitar ever. I had only seen it with the maple neck when he was playing it in the 80s. Right. So this neck was recently made by the folks at Fender, Alex Perez and some other folks over there, and it's got the headstock on the back. I mean, the
That's
logo
wild,
on
yeah.
the back of that headstock, so all of the electronics and all of the things are recreated based on what I know about his other guitars, what he used in them, and what he talked about being in this guitar. So This is the original part of the whole equation, and the rest of this stuff is all of the newly refurbished stuff that was done by Fender and also by Cooney at Performance Guitar, who originally worked on Frank's guitars and did all that stuff. So it's refurbished to the way that people know it, and I'm excited to play it, and I'll be playing it at different shows and things.
Very cool. Well, it's quite the trifecta because it's got 3 different versions of memorabilia to go with it, not to mention all the people that played the guitar with Frank, at the time as well. So it's an amazing piece of rock memorabilia, and as people know, there's very few real bona fide Hendrix instruments.
Yeah.
And this is one of them because the history has been traced. It's something that everybody knows about. It's been featured in other magazines, so there's no question as to its authenticity.
Yeah, it definitely is an amazing thing. And when you really think about, anything to compare it to, it's like the equivalent, in my mind anyway, of if you think of classical composers like Beethoven or Mozart, they didn't have a chance to play the same piano,
Right.
but Frank Zappa and Jimi Hendrix got to play this guitar. And then even a bunch of other guys, even as recently as last week, Steve Vai played Little Wing on this guitar at a benefit concert that he had set up
Very
with
cool.
Joe Satriani. So, it's a great instrument, and I am just sort of looking forward to sharing it with the world on some recordings and some other things. Getting it back to doing what it does best and making music.
Very cool. Well, thank you for bringing it in, man, because it's something everybody that's been around here has just been stoked about just seeing it and, just chasing the vibe of it. And my son has a Hendrix tattoo on his arm, so he was all excited about it, and, we're all excited to have it in the store. And thank you again for coming in.
Yeah,
and
thank
all
you.
that. Appreciate it.